Before we jump into this episode, I want to remind you that while Caitlin and Sophia are dietitians, we're not your dietitians. This means the information shared in the Food Freedom Fertility podcast is intended to entertain, educate, and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care. This information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes.
Welcome to another episode of Food, Freedom, and Fertility. My name is Caitlin Johnson. I'm one of the co-hosts here. I'm a registered dietitian, fertility expert, and a gal with PCOS. I'm here today on a solo episode to help us kick off PCOS Awareness Month. If you don't know, September is a month that around the globe, different PCOS experts, advocates, and women with PCOS take time to promote awareness about what PCOS is so that we can improve patient outcomes, draw attention for research purposes, and really for those of you that have PCOS to not feel alone so that we can have community conversations and deepen in our connection with one another with this condition. So, if you don't know this already, I have been in the process the last number of months writing a book about PCOS. It's called How to Get Pregnant with PCOS. And the first chapter is called Does PCOS Mean That You Are Infertile? And I thought, what better way to kick off this month than to give you a preview of this book that's coming. I am at a point in the process where it's all written and we're sending it off, the manuscript, to an editor for the first round of editing. So this isn't what it will look like in its most complete form. But nevertheless, the nuts and the bolts will be the same. The information that we're sharing generally is going to be the same. And I think it'll give you a good preview in what we have coming behind the scenes. So this episode's a little bit different. We don't do this very often, having something that we're just going to read. I'll try to do it with a tone that keeps you engaged. And these are my words. So, I hope you really enjoy it and get something from it. If you don't have PCOS, there's still going to be a lot in this chapter for you in terms of understanding hormones and how they're supposed to work and helping reframe infertility in a way that's approachable and helping you remove shame and just step into what you can do to support your body. So chapter 1, does PCOS mean you are infertile? Before we dive into the science of PCOS, I want to take you back to the earliest signals my body gave me that something was off. In the middle of a cross-country move from Florida to Seattle, starting in 7th grade, and trying to figure out a new life in a new place, I got my first period. I didn't tell my mom. With an older sister in the house and pads already in the bathroom, I thought I had dodged what felt like an embarrassing conversation. But then my cycle disappeared for months, and I was too ashamed to say anything and carried a quiet sense of fear inside of me, asking, what's wrong with me? The next time I bled, I happened to be at a friend's house. Her dad was an OBGYN, and their bathroom was stocked with more pads and tampons than I had ever seen. My friend's name was Adriana, and she showed me how to use a tampon, a true girl's girl. Once again, I avoided telling my mom. By the time we finally settled into our new home in Seattle, and that meant a new school for me, my cycle had vanished again. With no real sex education and no understanding of ovulation, I spiraled quickly into anxious questions. Could I be pregnant? How? I hadn't even kissed a boy. Months passed with silence and no answers. And then one day at school, I bled through my pants and didn't even realize it. The embarrassment and isolation of that moment marked the beginning of a long, confusing journey with my body, one that eventually led to my PCOS diagnosis. I had no idea that the irregularity of my cycle actually was an early signal that something was wrong. It was the first SOS signal my body was sending that would eventually lead to a PCOS diagnosis. The embarrassment I carried and being unwilling to talk to my own mom about my body was also an early evidence that conversations around our bodies and sex and periods was and still is far too taboo. Little did I know that so much of my life would end up revolving around these very conversations. I find myself daily helping interpret menstrual cycle issues, seeing signs of irregular cycles, answering questions like, am I ovulating, and looking for signs of progesterone insufficiency. Back then, I didn't know that any of these signs, my acne, my weight struggles, my irregular cycle, and chin hair, were the early whispers of a hormonal imbalance. I knew that I didn't feel like other girls. I didn't bleed when other girls bled, and I knew I didn't have confidence in my body like I saw other girls have. Unfortunately, I also didn't know enough to ask the right questions. PCOS doesn't always announce itself in a single moment. It creeps in. Irregular cycles, then acne, hair in places it shouldn't be, and hair falling out of places we desperately want it to remain, fatigue, and even mental health struggles. My body was trying to tell me something, but in my naive teenage mind, it just felt like betrayal. This was when I first began to feel the weight and complexity of becoming a woman, and more importantly, a woman with a mysterious diagnosis. I wish someone had told me, your symptoms matter, your story matters, and one day it's all going to make sense. What many just write off as puberty were early signs of PCOS. Unfortunately, some had more insidious and long-term ramifications. For instance, my levels of androgens in my teen years impacted how my breasts developed. I had more fibrous, fatty tissue, less glandular tissue that makes breast milk, and this translated to how much breast milk I made after I finally conceived and had my first baby, shaping our breastfeeding story from day one. At 14, I didn't know my food choices and my level of activity could help or harm me, that the constant painful acne had little to do with my teenage years. And when it didn't subside in my 20s, that was actually pointing to something other than puberty as the cause. There was so much that I didn't know that I wish I could go back and tell my little adolescent Caitlin. However, I do remember one bright side. I did enjoy having less frequent periods. I didn't bleed every month like my friends, and that seemed to be a blessing in the face of other frustrations. But here's where the convergence of PCOS and fertility combine. Chances are, like me, you were never taught in sex ed that your period's the result of ovulation in the absence of pregnancy. More simply, once you ovulate, there's only two destinations: pregnancy or a period bleed. When you flip that equation around, if you weren't getting a period and you weren't pregnant, you weren't ovulating. You probably just heard, if you got your period, you're not pregnant. Sex ed's notorious for leaving you with the idea that you could get pregnant at any time in your cycle, but nothing could be further from the truth, and it's way more nuanced than that. A lot of what we were taught was oversimplified or just plain wrong. Let's really flip the paradigm here. If you've been tracking your cycles for years, you likely have some level of fluency. Yet many of us just track our bleeding or period days. We open an app on our phone and we mark the first day of our period and the last day of that period bleed. Then we repeat this when our period returns a month or so later. Some just loosely have awareness that their period comes at a particular time of a month. For instance, it usually comes in the first week of a calendar month or towards the middle of the month. This gets tricky when calendar months vary in length and your cycle has some variability and irregularities too. Those of us with PCOS don't have that same awareness typically. Some of you are reading this and thinking, would track what? What's a period bleed? That same blessing, not ovulating and then subsequently not having a period, a blessing in high school, is actually one of the biggest things standing in the way of you getting pregnant with PCOS. We need a paradigm shift. The time you bleed in your menstrual cycle is not the main event or even the purpose of your menstrual cycle. Ovulation is the main event, and it only happens once per menstrual cycle. So while we track bleeding days, ovulation is really the thing we need to dial into and begin tracking as well. Pregnancy can only happen if you have sex in the 3 to 5 days leading up to ovulation or within 12 to 24 hours after ovulation. If you didn't know that, you're not alone and you're in good company. It took me trying to conceive at the age of 28 to learn these things myself. At most, there's about 5 or 6 day window when sex could lead to pregnancy, and much of that window is before you ovulate. Now, that is if you ovulate. One of the key diagnostic signs that you have PCOS is that you don't ovulate at all, or you ovulate very infrequently. The medical jargon for this would say anovulation, not ovulating at all, or oligoovulation, ovulating very infrequently. And without ovulation, there's no chance of pregnancy. At 16, I didn't think twice about it. Only having 2 periods a year felt like freedom, like I'd somehow lucked out. But fast forward a decade, and at 28, when I was trying to have a baby, that same blessing turned out to be my greatest enemy. My frenemy? So, what the heck is PCOS, anyways? Polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS for short, is one of the most common hormonal conditions in women, affecting somewhere between 1 in 10 to 1 in 5 women. That depends on which study you're looking at and how it's diagnosed. It's not one single thing you can point to, like a cyst or a hormone level or even a beard. It's a collection of signs and symptoms that share a common hormonal and metabolic root. People usually say the acronym by its letters, PCOS. I've heard it a lot when people say PCOS, and I've even heard medical providers call it that. But it's more commonly referred to by its letters, PCOS. And if you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, that's how you'll say it. At its core, PCOS is a problem with how your body regulates certain hormones. This imbalance can cause the ovaries to either not release an egg regularly, that's irregular, or not ovulate at all, that's absent ovulation. We make more of certain hormones, especially androgens, than what's typical in a woman. Androgens, called male hormones, often, but the truth is women's bodies make them too, and we just make them in smaller amounts. When those levels climb too high, they can change the way you look, the way you feel and function, triggering symptoms like acne or excess hair growth in places you don't want it, like your beard or above your lip. And it can also trigger hair loss and hair thinning or balding. Despite the name, you don't have to have cysts on your ovaries to have PCOS. Having a high male hormone and a regular cycle is enough to obtain the diagnosis even without cysts. Those of us who do have the extra cysts on our ovaries wonder how dangerous or harmful they are. Let me put your mind at ease. Cysts is a term that refers to any fluid-filled sac in your body. While you may have many cysts on your ovaries compared to how many you should have, calling them cysts is also kind of misleading. Those polycystic ovaries seen on the ultrasound are just many immature follicles that contain very small oocytes or eggs, the female genetic material. These follicles remain immature. They don't receive the hormonal green light to grow and release the egg. This impact on the cycle and the signs of high male hormones leads to this condition initially being treated like just a gynecologic issue or only in the fertility spaces. But we're seeing a shift currently where research is showing PCOS is more than just a reproductive issue. It's also deeply connected to your metabolism and your entire hormonal system, otherwise known as the endocrine system. Many women with PCOS have some degree of insulin resistance, meaning their bodies need to pump out extra insulin to keep blood sugar in proper ranges. Insulin is a hormone. High levels of it can in turn push your ovaries to make more androgens. Remember those male hormones? This sets off a vicious cycle that affects ovulation, skin, hair, and even long-term health risks like type 2 diabetes. The tricky part is that PCOS doesn't look the same in everyone. Some women have all the classic signs: irregular cycles, acne, chin hair, weight struggles, poor body image, and difficulty conceiving. Others may only have 1 or 2 symptoms. That's why it's often called a spectrum disorder. Your experience with PCOS is unique to you. While your provider may say something to you like, "You don't look like you have PCOS," in truth, PCOS doesn't have a look. It's a syndrome, not a disease. Does that confuse you? You might wonder why it's not called a disease or an illness. In medicine, a syndrome means a pattern, a collection of signs and symptoms that tend to show up together rather than in a single clear-cut condition with just one known cause. With PCOS, that pattern includes irregular ovulation, higher than typical androgen levels, and sometimes polycystic appearing ovaries. But the reasons those things happen can be different for different women. For one person, insulin resistance might be the main driver. For another, it could be the brain ovary hormone signaling connection or chronic inflammation disrupting hormones. That's why PCOS can look so different from woman to woman, and why your treatment plan should be different and personalized to you, not just a one-size-fits-all approach. So, how is PCOS diagnosed? There's no single test that can give you a yes or a no answer for PCOS. Instead, diagnosis is based on a combination of symptoms, lab work, and sometimes even imaging. Most healthcare providers use what's called the Rotterdam criteria. According to this approach, you need to meet at least two out of the three following issues: irregular or absent ovulation. This usually shows up as menstrual cycles that are longer than 35 days, fewer than 8 in a calendar year, or cycles that vary a lot in length from month to month. The number two thing is signs of high androgens, either seen on blood work like elevated testosterone or other androgens like DHEAS, or visible symptoms of high androgens like acne and unwanted hair growth, especially on the chin, jawline, chest, or belly, or even balding or thinning of hair on the scalp. Polycystic ovaries is the third thing that can be shown on ultrasound. This means having a high number of small, immature follicles than is expected for your age. Remember, these aren't true cysts, they're eggs that haven't matured enough to be released. In the most recent PCOS guidelines, the use of a lab called AMH has been an alternative to undergoing the transvaginal ultrasound looking for polycystic ovaries. You're already having blood work done to look for higher androgens, so this can simply be added to the order. AMH is typically higher in women with PCOS and can give an indication whether ovaries are polycystic or not. It's kind of a surrogate marker due to the fact that the small cysts and follicles on your ovary make AMH and send it into the bloodstream. More of this lab means more follicles in the maturing process, but they're stuck still. Importantly, other conditions can look like PCOS, things like thyroid disorders, high prolactin, or certain rare hormone disorders. These need to be ruled out first before obtaining a true diagnosis. And that's why a thorough evaluation by a qualified medical provider matters. Now, let's shift a little bit more and talk about the fertility side of the story. How ovulation frequency can affect your fertility. So now you understand what PCOS is and how hormones could impact ovulation, and how ovulation is the main event of your menstrual cycle, not just your period bleed. Let's build on that. If you ovulate monthly, you'll have 12 chances per year to conceive. That's a dozen potential opportunities for pregnancy, same as your best friend who doesn't have PCOS. But what if you only have a period every few months? 12 periods per calendar year equals 12 chances at ovulation. 6 periods per calendar year is 6 chances. 3 periods per calendar year is 3 chances at ovulation. And here's the thing: not every bleed is a sign that ovulation happened, especially when you bleed infrequently. With PCOS, it's common to experience something called anovulatory bleeding, meaning your body sheds the uterine lining without releasing an egg. So even if you are bleeding a few times a year, those aren't guaranteed chances to conceive. Frustrating, I know. We'll spend time in a later chapter discussing how you can tell if and when you're ovulating. Much of our goal in treating PCOS for fertility revolves around restoring ovulation and improving egg quality. That's why you'll need to keep marking days on a calendar. The next step is to start paying attention to other signs your body's sending beyond what you're actively bleeding. You'll need to dig deeper and start learning what your body is really doing each cycle, and I'll tell you why. In these first chapters, I'll be asking two important questions. Are you ovulating, and when are you ovulating? As we work together to support your metabolism and balance your hormones, you'll start to see your cycle become more regular, and you'll be able to answer those questions with confidence. You'll be confident because you have data. As your cycle length shortens, meaning the time from the first day of one period to the first day of the next, the time between ovulations shortens too. And that one shift, ovulating more frequently, can significantly boost your chances of getting pregnant. Remember, each cycle offers an opportunity at ovulation and conception. If you have more cycles, that means you have more chances to get pregnant. I want to help illustrate this point with my own story. I remember sitting in the OBGYN's office asking if she thought I was ovulating when we were trying to conceive our first child. At that time, my cycles were about 45 or 60 days long, meaning there was 45 days in between the first day of one bleeding of my period until the end of that cycle when the next cycle started, where I began bleeding again. This could be as short as 45 days or as long as 60 days. Now, in a cycle where you ovulate, it will typically be about 2 weeks or 14 days between the point of ovulation and when your next period bleed starts. Since most of the medical community holds the opinion that women have 28-day cycles, it creates another important timestamp, ovulation, happening about day 14 of your cycle. Now, if I was ovulating at all, which was still a big question for me at that point in time, it would have been somewhere around day 31 of my cycle, all the way up to day 46. Why? Because add 14 to those numbers and they would equal 45 and 60, the actual length of time between my first day of bleeding in one cycle to the first day of bleeding in the next. So back to my story. I asked my doctor, do you think I'm ovulating? And if so, when? She quickly told me, you're ovulating on day 14. That didn't seem right intuitively to me. We had been trying for over 2 years with no success, and we'd had a lot of sex around day 14 of my cycle. I left the appointment feeling completely hopeless. She had a reason to say day 14. She was taught in medical school that women cycle every 28 days, and she was probably also taught in medical school that the time between ovulation and your period is 14 days. But then you get a simple math problem because in her version of cycles, my cycle was 28 days, yet I told her my cycles weren't 28 days long. They were 45 to 60. So my actual cycle probably looked something like 45 days long minus 14 days equals an ovulation day of around cycle day 31, or 60 days long minus 14 days, an actual ovulation day of cycle day 46. So if I was ovulating somewhere in my cycle, it was happening between day 31 and day 46 of my cycle. If you are ovulating and there's some rhythm to your cycle, you can take the length of your cycle and subtract 14. This is around the time you ovulate. There's more science and nuance to this, and we'll get into this in Chapter 2, Understanding Your Cycle and Establishing Your Baseline. My point, though, is this. As I began looking into the research, it was painfully clear that I understood more about natural cycles than the so-called expert sitting across from me. I know not every OBGYN lacks this knowledge, but if you have a uterus and ovaries, I believe you deserve to be educated enough about your own body that you never have to wonder when these questions come up. You already walk into any doctor or medical appointment as the most expert in the room with regards to your body. Chances are, after reading through the rest of the chapters of this book, you may also be the expert in the room when it comes to understanding menstrual cycles, how they relate to fertility, and where you'll need to optimize things to get ovulation happening like clockwork. You'll build the confidence to know if and when you're ovulating, and you'll have the tools to keep improving your fertility from there. Hey, Food Freedom Fertility listeners, we're taking a break from this episode to talk about our sponsor, Tempdrop. One of the reasons why Sophia and I love this brand so much is that it's an all-in-one solution and it's so easy to use. You wear this Tempdrop sensor on your upper arm during your sleep, and then in the morning when it's convenient for you, you sync it to their charting app. If you've been tracking your fertile signs for a while now, you'll know that this means freedom. And isn't this the Food Freedom Fertility Podcast? In order to accurately track your basal body temperature, you need to wake up at the same time every morning. But what if you're a shift worker or your schedule differs and sometimes you sleep in and sometimes you don't? That's one of the reasons why I love this tech so much. Tempdrop uses the latest scientific knowledge to bring you an accurate method of cycle tracking and identifying your fertile window. Tempdrop's sensor continuously monitors your basal body temperature while you're sleeping. And then in the morning, you open the app on your phone and you sync the data. And what that means is that it's not transmitting information from this sensor next to your arm to your phone all night long. And I don't know about you, that gives me a lot of peace of mind that I'm not exposing myself to radiation all the hours that I'm sleeping. Because this tech makes tracking your temperature so much more accessible and really takes a lot of the brain power out of it. You don't even need to charge it every day. This is one of the reasons why I personally use Tempdrop to track my own basal body temperature. Make sure when you go to tempdrop.com that you use our discount code exclusive to our Food Freedom Fertility listeners. That code is FFF15, or you can head to the link in our show notes of all these episodes. Click on that link and you'll get 15% off today. How PCOS affects fertility. Up to this point, I've kept things pretty conversational because I want you to feel like your best friend is teaching you about these things. But I'm about to make a shift and it's going to get kind of clinical. If you get overwhelmed, slow down your reading speed and visualize these things happening within your own body. Here we go. PCOS is not just a hormonal condition, it's a fertility condition too. PCOS disrupts ovulation, thickens the uterine lining, increases inflammation, and skews the hormones needed to support conception and pregnancy. Much of this is related in part to insulin resistance. So let's define that here. Insulin resistance is when the body cells don't respond properly to insulin, a hormone that helps move sugar from the blood into cells for energy. So as a result, the body needs to make more insulin to keep blood sugar in check. Insulin resistance is linked to type 2 diabetes, but it's also a major driver in PCOS. In fact, many women with PCOS have insulin resistance even if they haven't yet developed diabetes. High insulin levels can worsen hormone imbalances. Understanding that insulin resistance helps us understand PCOS better because while most of the body becomes insulin resistant, there's a section of your body that doesn't, and it's your ovaries. Since your ovaries are reacting to the insulin, they initially welcome in a lot of blood sugar and it gives them a lot of energy. Think about any toddler you've ever met. When they get too much sugar, the extra energy just turns into chaos. It's the same in your ovaries too. This extra energy isn't a good thing. It ends up increasing testosterone, disrupting ovulation, raising inflammation levels, and contributing to symptoms like acne, irregular cycles, and weight gain. So, insulin resistance isn't just a diabetes thing, it's a core issue in PCOS too. It's one of the main drivers behind both fertility issues and the outward symptoms of PCOS. So, let's unpack how. Ovulatory dysfunction means inconsistent or absent ovulation, and it's one of the biggest fertility hurdles with PCOS. Without the release of an egg, pregnancy can't happen. When the ovary has too much insulin exposure and too much energy inside of it, a lot of metabolic processes are impacted. Uterine lining issues. The endometrium or uterine lining may grow too thick or not shed properly due to hormonal imbalances. A fertilized egg needs a well-prepared lining to implant and grow. Without it, early miscarriage or implantation failure becomes more likely. Think about a scenario where you haven't had a period bleed for 6 months, but then you conceive. The lining of your uterus that typically sheds monthly after ovulation is old and not primed properly for implantation. Chronic inflammation is inflammation that subtly interferes with the ovaries, uterine lining, and many metabolic processes and overall reproductive health in PCOS. This compounds the hormonal chaos and can contribute to fatigue, acne, and even emotional distress, all of which further stress the body. And perhaps most cruelly, PCOS attacks so many things that make us feel like a woman. It can cause thinning hair on our heads while triggering coarse, unwanted hair elsewhere. It turns our skin into a battleground of breakouts and inflammation. And it can distort our relationship with our bodies. Bloating, weight gain, and discomfort can leave us feeling disconnected from the person in the mirror. It can interfere with fertility and make the dream of carrying a baby feel out of reach. A physical and emotional assault that can shake your confidence at its core. Many women with PCOS feel like they're doing everything right and are still struggling. And the emotional roller coaster that comes with infertility only adds to the challenge. Hope rises and crashes with every irregular cycle and every negative pregnancy test. The confusion, the waiting, the isolation, it's all real. But there is good news. Understanding why ovulation isn't happening or why it's so infrequent is the first step in restoring it. Whether it's addressing insulin resistance, reducing inflammation, or teaching your brain how to properly talk to your ovaries, fertility is possible and you're not alone on this path. You may have heard before, just try for a year, and if you're not pregnant, come back. It's the standard guidance for couples under 35 trying to conceive. But if you've been diagnosed with PCOS, this one size fits all advice doesn't apply to you, and it shouldn't delay your care. You just learned that PCOS is a condition that often disrupts ovulation, and if you're not ovulating regularly, each month may not even offer a true chance at conception. Waiting 12 months under the assumption that you're ovulating like clockwork is not only frustrating, but it's a waste of precious time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. This advice is predicated by the fact that most couples without any infertility diagnoses will conceive with regular intercourse within 12 cycles. If you're reading this book, your PCOS diagnosis means that you will not get 12 cycles to try in a year. Frustrating, right? This means you shouldn't have to wait to get help. It also means we have to work together to increase your odds. You're well within your rights to advocate for earlier fertility support, especially lab work and treatment options your medical team can provide. This book will be a great asset in improving your natural fertility and restoring or improving ovulation. It will also be an incredible asset if you're also considering ovulation stimulation or other reproductive care. We will discuss ideas, talk about how and when to advocate for yourself in more depth. The resources in this book will also help improve the hormones in your body, improve egg quality, and make any subsequent pregnancy so much healthier than if you didn't implement these strategies first. Nutrition will support your body in preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, and for the rest of your PCOS life. Now, that's about halfway through chapter 1 of this book. There's a section that comes up a little bit further in the chapter called Myths and Misconceptions. And I want to read that portion to you before we close out today. And if this has wet your whistle, then you need to stay tuned for announcements of when this book is going to get published. Myths and Misconceptions about PCOS. The mental game is where most of this battle is going to be fought. How will you respond after you miss your supplements for a couple of days in a row? What happens when you have an evening out with your girlfriends and end up drinking after you told yourself you wouldn't this cycle? What will you order in the drive-thru after a bad night of sleep? Will you reach for that old Starbucks drink that helped you drown your sorrows, or will you instead choose an option that's less of an assault on your blood sugar and stress levels? There is enough uncertainty with this diagnosis, enough shame that comes that joins us all on its own. Since PCOS touches so many areas of our health and life, it's important to chat about a few common myths and misconceptions. Myth number 1 is that PCOS means you're infertile. It's a common and harmful misconception. While PCOS can make conception more difficult, it does not make pregnancy impossible. Many women with PCOS conceive naturally or just with a small amount of support from prescription medications. Understanding your cycle, restoring ovulation, and managing your metabolic health can dramatically improve your chances of both natural conception or with the help of medicine. The natural supports for PCOS, like nutrition, movement, stress supports, circadian rhythm, supplements, and other options, can also decrease the amount of time spent trying to conceive. These focus areas also decrease many pregnancy-related risks and help your baby to have the best start at life. So if you're already marching down the reproductive medicine path, like taking ovulation stim meds like Clomid and Letrozole, or moving on to IUI or IVF, I'd encourage you to view these interventions as necessary for you and your future baby. The truth of the matter is that what improves your PCOS will improve your fertility, and this path will also pay rich dividends in other areas of your health for your entire life. Myth number 2, extreme dieting is the only way to manage PCOS. Some believe that PCOS can only be controlled through rigid dietary rules, but balance is key. A sustainable, whole food-based approach that supports blood sugar stability is often more effective than extreme restriction. Food is not a punishment. In fact, it's part of your healing. I'd say it's one of the biggest parts of your healing. Myth number 3, PCOS is caused by poor lifestyle choices. This is one of the most damaging myths. PCOS is a complex condition with genetic, environmental, and hormonal roots. While lifestyle can improve symptoms, it's not the cause. Let go of the blame. You did not cause this. You don't have PCOS because your doctor prescribed weight loss and made you feel fat. You don't have PCOS because you ate too many carbs. If carbs caused PCOS, then most everyone would have it. Myth number 4, everyone with PCOS looks the same. Some people assume PCOS has a look. The truth is, it varies wildly. Some women are thin, others gain weight. Some have acne, others don't. Some ovulate easily, others have never ovulated naturally in their whole life. This book is for you, regardless of what category you might find yourself in. This syndrome shows up differently in everybody, and that's why your care should be individualized too. So we need a new narrative, not where you're lazy and you're broken, because most of us have been told we're not trying hard enough or that we just need to lose weight. And if you really were eating that well, you wouldn't be this size. But hear me clearly. You are strong. You are not lazy, and you do not lack willpower. In fact, most of the women with PCOS that I've ever worked with have done more diets, more workouts, more supplement protocols, more tracking than the average person ever attempts. And they've had little to show for it, not because they didn't try hard enough, but because the deck had already been stacked against them hormonally. When hormones like insulin, testosterone, cortisol, and progesterone are out of balance, your body resists those efforts. It holds on to weight. It delays or blocks ovulation. It makes progress feel agonizingly slow. But here's the good news. Once we start to restore balance, those same efforts, your meals, your level of activity, your rest, they finally start to work with you, not against you. That's when the scale will shift. Your period will return. Ovulation will be more consistent. And when you start to feel more you. This chapter, this framework, and this book were written to remind you that your story is not over, your body is not broken, and that we're just getting started. So I hope that this was encouraging to you. There's so much excitement for me around this book coming out. And ovulation is just such a big part of the story with PCOS. It's partly how you can get your diagnosis, but it impacts so many different things. One thing that I'd love to mention at the end here is that Tempdrop, our sponsor for this summer season of Food Freedom Fertility, has been a huge part of a lot of my clients being able to track their cycle. Chapter 2 of the book is going to go all into how you can track your cycle to understand and answer the question of if you're ovulating and when, and to use your cycle to see improvements in your health, that it can show and reflect that all the effort that you're putting in is actually paying off. So I'm excited for you to get your hands on this book sometime soon. More on that once we're through the first editing process and I actually have a publication date more set out. But I do love Tempdrop for tracking cycles, especially for the freedom it provides about not having to wake up at the same time in the morning. It's especially helpful for me in this season of my life where I wake up a lot. My husband worked second and third shift through a lot of the time that we were trying to conceive our first child. And even though I didn't have a kid that was waking me up then, I had a husband that was either coming into bed in the middle of the night or getting up really early. And so you can have lots of reasons for varied sleep issues. And Tempdrop takes a lot of the questioning out of if we're getting accurate BBT readings and pinpointing ovulation. And since ovulation is such a big part of the problem and struggle and narrowing down on it and getting sex timing well timed, I love Tempdrop for that. And I think it's a great resource for those with and without PCOS that want to track their cycle and hone in on when ovulation took place. It does not predict ovulation, but it can help you do some of that math I was talking about in this chapter of when you typically ovulate. So this has been another week of Food Freedom Fertility. Thanks for joining in. If this encouraged you or interested you at all, I would love for you to share this episode with any friends you have that have PCOS, and we will see you next week.